Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lois Kiley, our program chairman, to introduce our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Paul. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to give a shout out to Peggy Dellinger and Gary Edelson for providing us with the technical guidance that is making this presentation possible. They have also assured us that our wonderful supportive audience will forgive us any technical glitches. So fingers crossed, everyone. Questions will be taken at the end of the talk, and you may write them in the chat box in your computer. Gary will let us know how much time we have for questions, but Jim may also be reached at his website if you have additional questions for him later on at thechurchofthepresidents.org, and he'll mention that again. Also, some of you who are joining us for this presentation by Jim Foley are not members of the Ocean Township Historical Museum. Let me welcome you and encourage you to join. It is not restricted to township residents and is only $15. Such a bargain. And the good news is, as Paul said, we are open. The museum offers many exciting events and opportunities for its members. Please visit our website to find out about them and the days and times that you may visit the museum in person. We have an extraordinary exhibit on women's suffrage that you won't want to miss. And it's free. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Jim Foley. In 1998, he joined the Board of Trustees of the Long Branch Historical Museum Association, which oversees the restoration of the Church of the Presidents. He became the 4th president of the organization in 2015, a position that he still holds. Congratulations, Jim. Jim grew up in Deal, in a house previously owned by Ham Fisher, the creator of the Joe Palooka comic books. Some of you may remember those. Perhaps that's where he caught the history bug. Jim has served as Deal's first official historian, and he founded the Deal Historical Society. He has written dozens of history-related articles that have been published in New York and New Jersey magazines and newspapers. Additionally, Jim has worked tirelessly to preserve local historical structures, including the Monmouth Beach Life Saving Station. He is particularly proud of locating the Thomas Potter Cave along a branch of Poplar Brook in Ocean Township. Jim resides in Oakhurst with his wife Kate and their son Kristen. Today he's going to tell us about Elberon's iconic Church of the Presidents and the notables who worship there, as well as the restoration process. Jim, I see you on the video. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And now I give you the microphone.
Well, thank you so much, Lois, and welcome everyone who's joined us this evening. Later on, Lois may regret giving me the microphone, because the worst thing you can do is give an Irishman a microphone. But anyway, I do want to say thank you, Lois, because it is a privilege for me to be with you this evening and all the people that have signed up. And if anyone's out there who thought that this was the presidential debate, the debate is tomorrow night. So if you want to log off, if you thought that's what you were doing, feel free. I also want to especially thank, as Lois did, Gary and Peggy for their technical assistance with this. Anyone who knows me and knows my flip phone, they know that I have absolutely nothing to do with the technology for tonight's program. I do want to call someone out, Paul and Marge Edelson. If you can see this book on the screen, there's a book recently published by the County of Monmouth of all the historians in Monmouth County's history. And Paul and Marge are included in the book, which is quite an honor to them for all of their dedication and hard work over the decades, but also a shout out to Ocean Township, because as the president of the Long Branch Historical Museum, I can say hands down, Ocean Township has the best historical museum, not only in Monmouth County, I would say, in the entire state. The number of programs that you guys run is just amazing. And when the Church of the Presidents reopens, we're certainly going to be calling on you guys to help us out. But if you want to get a copy of that book on Monmouth County historians, just reach out to the Monmouth County Clerk's Office in Freehold. It's free, or at least I think it's free. I think if they charge for it, Gary Edelson has volunteered to pay your cost. So anyway, Church of the Presidents is in the Elberon section of Long Branch. And I was just prepared to, give a little bit of history of what we've been doing recently at the place, because anyone who's driven by has seen that there's been a lot of progress made. But then Lois mentioned, well, Jim, maybe take a step back and tell a little bit about the history and how Elberon came to be and all those types of things. So let's go back to the 1860s. And one of the most prominent visitors to ever visit Long Branch was in August of 1861. Mary Todd Lincoln and several of her family members and friends spent part of August, I think it was about 2 weeks, in Long Branch. And most of the history books will credit that with the birth of Long Branch as a resort. But certainly Mary Todd Lincoln did have a dramatic impact on the building up of Long Branch. Followed by that, the Civil War came. There was a guy by the name of Lewis Brown who was down in the southern states, and he was a building developer, but he was also a staunch abolitionist, and he just couldn't, resolve himself to the fact that he was down south while we're fighting over slavery. So he left his business investments down there and came back to New York. And then something happened in July of 1863. For 4 days, had the New York City draft riots. And Lewis Brown had the audacity to try to register a African-American at the polls to vote, and they were immediately chased back to Brown's house in Westchester, and they broke down the door to his house, and they were threatening to lynch both the African-American and Lewis Brown. They actually jumped on horseback and fled New York and came down to Long Branch and stayed in one of the massive hotels that Long Branch was noted for. As the summer of '63 came to an end, Lewis Brown called Governor Seymour of New York, and he asked, what's the sentiment up there? Is it safe to come back? And the governor said, actually, it's not. So you may want to, just stay down there. And back then in the 1860s, that was it. Labor Day came, and the summer was over. Everybody went back to New York or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. Lewis Brown stayed. And he figured out quickly what those of us who were born and raised here know, is that, September and October are really beautiful months down here at the Jersey Shore. So he stayed and he, witnessed the fall at the shore, and then eventually went back to New York. He came back the next year and he saw a little further. If I could, steal a line from a Jerry Garcia song, They Love Each Other. He saw, and the line is, to see a little further. And that's what Lewis Brown did. He saw a little further that there had to be more to this area than just big old wooden boarding houses and hotels. And he envisioned a cottage colony where people may want to come down and just have their families in a private residence. So he got together with Howard Potter from Brown Brothers, today known as Brown Brothers in Harriman, and then Howard Potter's father-in-law, James M. Brown, the president of Brown Brothers, and they bought the land. James Brown bought the land that today consists of West End. Howard Potter and Lewis Brown bought all the land from Tackanassie Lake to Woolley Avenue. I guess today you guys would know that as Park Avenue. And then Lewis Brown, on his own accord, purchased from Woolley Avenue, or Park Avenue, to the Deal border. And they decided to develop this into a cottage community. They hired Frederick Law Olmsted, who laid out Central Park, to be their landscape architect. And he sat and actually, you know, what a great job that must be, to just go sit and watch nature for 3 months and then come back and write a report of where you should, you know, lay out streets and plant a tree or shrubs, or depending upon the sunrise and sunset. But again, Lewis Brown saw a little further, and he disagreed with Frederick Law Olmsted. So they went with Brown's plan and not Olmsted's plan for the layout of Elberon. And they laid out the streets, they sold the lots, and they built cottages. And when we think about who came, the movie about, you know, if you build it, they'll come. Well, you know, Lewis Brown and Howard Potter and James M. Brown, they built it, and the people came. Potter and Brown built houses right next door to each other. And then those two houses actually later were owned by George W. Childs and President Ulysses S. Grant. But others came, and Anthony Drexel and George W. Childs and Commodore Garrison and George Pullman and General Sherman and Sheridan and Wilson, Moses Taylor. General Wilson, you may recall, was the one who caught the president of the Confederacy dressed in women's garb, trying to escape his capture. But they all came here to the area. And it was, you know, when we say these things, the buildings that they built were cottages, you know, that's really, I guess, a local term, because they were, by today's standards, like large mansions. But at the time they were called cottages. So what happened is, you know, all the people came for the summer visits, and they all attended churches. And Long Branch had a number of churches, mostly on Broadway Avenue. And you would get into your horse and carriage, and you'd drive on the dirt roads. And if it hadn't rained in a while, you know, there would be lots of dust kicking up into the carriage. And certainly the summer visitors were not very thrilled with, you know, getting out of their carriage in their fancy Sunday dresses and best suits and being covered in dust. So after several years, it was decided maybe we should build the church closer to their cottage communities. And that's what they did. Lewis Brown, who was the founder of the community, as I said, and that's actually how they got the name for Elberon. His name was Lewis Blanchard Brown, and they shortened it to L.B. Brown, or L. Brown, Elberon, and that's how Elberon got his name, from Lewis Brown. So Lewis Brown donated a parcel of land on Ocean Avenue, just south of Lincoln Avenue. And then George Childs and Anthony Drexel, Childs was a newspaper man from Philadelphia, Drexel was the banker. They both had oceanfront cottages, and they donated the capital to build the church. And that was done in 1879. And it was a very beautiful building. As a matter of fact, Gary, if you can hear me, maybe you can put the first slide up. And this is how the church looked when it was built in 1879. Now, if you've ever driven past the Church of the Presidents, you'll look and say, hey, that doesn't quite look the same. Well, it's because it doesn't look the same. Originally, when it was built, it did not have the tower. The tower wasn't added until 1892, 1893. We can slow down a little bit, Gary, and just go back to slide number 2 with the tower. There we go. So that's the tower that was added. And basically the way that they did it was they cut the 1/3 of the building and slid it back, and then built the tower in between. the front portion and the rear portion. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on as far as some of the problems that caused the building itself. But this was the church that everyone went to. Next slide, please, Gary. And probably the most famous or well remembered is not for what he did, but for what happened to him here in Elberon, and that's President James A. Garfield. And that's the Oceanfront Franklin Cottage at the foot of Lincoln Avenue. And then you can see some other scenes. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a temporary railroad track that was laid from the Elberon train station right up to the front porch of the cottage. What I find amazing is that all of the right-of-way for the station, the eighth of a mile track to be laid down Lincoln Avenue, was not approved until 6 p.m. on September 5th, 1881. And that's when they started. And if you look, you'll see there's a flashlight or a headlight from a locomotive because they worked through the night. And by 1 o'clock the next day, the eighth of a mile railroad spur was completed from the Elberon station right to the front door. And it's, Ocean Township years ago did a wonderful presentation with their school age program that they did. And they did a presentation on Garfield's train going down. And I learned, even though I'm president of the museum, I learned from those fourth graders. So hats off to Ocean Township Museum. And Gary, you want to go with the next slide? And again, that's just a close-up of the train, which went right up to the front porch. All right, next slide. And here's, a day or two after President Garfield arrived in Elberon. Obviously, he had an oceanfront bedroom, and he's looking out the window. If you see in the right side, there's sailboats in the back. But right at this time, they rang the bell over at the Church of the Presidents, which was across the street from here. And Garfield asked his bride, why are they ringing that bell? And she replied, it was for his recovery, Mr. President, your recovery. Next slide. Now, I just have to give a shout out to Marv Comer from Long Branch because he posted this photo on Facebook, the Long Branch History Facebook page. And it's the first photo I've ever seen of the Elberon train station, which is pretty amazing. And this is the image of the newly sworn in President Chester Alan Arthur arriving in Elberon the day after President Garfield had died. Next slide, Gary. This is William Appleton Potter, who's a brother to Howard Potter, one of the owners of all this lands. But William Appleton Potter was the architect who actually designed the Church of the Presidents, along with many other of the buildings up at Princeton University, quite a prestigious firm. Next slide. Now, where President Garfield may be the best remembered for his dying here in Elberon, the section of Long Branch, certainly President Grant was the most loved. And he spent a full dozen years, a dozen summers at his cottage in Elberon, right there on Ocean Avenue. Today it remains an empty lot, but here's a picture of him sitting outside the cottage. And here's another picture of the cottage. Next. This is a picture of Stella Maris, as you know, which was immediately north of President Grant's cottage. And it was unfortunately torn down not that long ago. Next slide, Gary. Gary. Next slide. All right, and that's a picture of George Childs in his office in Philadelphia. Next slide. Now, this is an interesting photo, I think. And I'll just pose a question. Does anyone know what this is, other than a dinner plate? Well, it is part of the dinnerware set of Rutherford B. Hayes, who was another one of the presidents who came here to Long Branch and Elberon. And Theodore Russell Davis, who was a Civil War artist for Harper's Weekly. He actually was called to the White House to do a drawing of Mrs. Hayes. And while there, they started chatting, and she was saying, oh yeah, she just ordered china from Limoges. And Davis was like, well, you know, isn't that a shame that you have to have the presidential dinnerware created outside of America? So Mrs. Hayes immediately canceled the contract and hired Russell Davis to create the dinnerware for the president. His art studio was in Asbury Park, and this is where he created all of the artwork for the dinnerware. Next slide. If you look at the bottom one, the frog on the lily pad, that's actually a picture that was printed in the Asbury Park Shore Press in the 1870s during the President Hayes's term. And the article was titled "The First Resident of Asbury Park," obviously a little tongue-in-cheek. Next slide. So does anyone know who this is? Obviously it says right up top, William McKinley at Long Branch, but the gentleman seated to his right is Garrett Hobart, who was a Long Branch native. And there they are at Hobart Summer Cottage, which was at the corner of Cedar and Norwood Avenue. Today, the property houses the Guggenheim Library, part of Monmouth University. Back then, it was just a summer cottage, and Hobart had rented it for the summer. He would have become president, but unfortunately, he died before McKinley's re-election. Next slide, Gary. And this is actually a letter written to Garrett Hobart from President McKinley, dated June of 1899. And it says, Garrett Hobart, Long Branch, New Jersey. Mrs. McKinley joins me in affectionate birthday greetings with the hope that your journey was without discomfort and that your summer house will bring you health. Mrs. McKinley sends love to Mrs. Hobart. William McKinley. And that was June of 1899, and unfortunately, by November of 99, Garrett Hobart had passed. Next slide, please. Anyone know who this is? That is Benjamin Harrison. And one of the things I love about President Harrison's visit here was the 4th of July, 1898, he gave a very passionate speech before the Society of the Cincinnati at the Hathaway Inn in Deal, where he spoke that, you know, our involvement with that war, the Spanish-American War, had nothing to do with conquest, but had everything to do with humanity. But I always wondered, you know, what was he doing the rest of the time? At night he gave the speech, and then I found the sign-in book to the Elberon Beach Club. And on July 4th, 1898, ex-President Benjamin Harrison signed in as a guest at the Elberon Beach Club. Next slide, please. And of course, you know, President Woodrow Wilson accepting the nomination or the renomination of his presidency at Shadow Lawn, right there in Long Branch. I could give a whole lecture, but if you look at the person leaning up against a pillar with a hat covering his face, that is Colonel George Breton McClellan Harvey, and he was a person who started advocating for Wilson's election back in 1905, before he was even governor of New Jersey. Next slide. And there's Woodrow Wilson Hall, which has made news recently. And I guess that plaque has been taken down. So that's a discussion for another story. But next slide, please. All right, so this is I had put in the advertisement for this that we were going to pay special tribute to Edgar Dinkelspiel, who was the first president of the Long Branch Historical Museum Association. And actually, just as President McKinley wished Garrett Hobart happy birthday wishes, I'd like to wish Edgar Dinkelspiel happy birthday wishes, since his birthday was October 19th, just 2 days ago. And today, or 2 days ago, would have been his 105th birthday. But what happened with the Church of the Presidents after, the 7 presidents had come and gone in the 1920s and the 1930s, people started to move away. The advent of the airplane and travel to other countries, the lure of Long Branch had waned. And so did the membership of the Church of the Presidents. By the late 1940s, it got so bad that they couldn't even afford a pastor. So the pastor, Bodine, had to volunteer his time. And by the early 1950s, the diocese in Trenton decided to deconsecrate the building and tear down the building and then sell the land. Now, Edgar Dinkelspiel, who was also a Long Branch City Councilman, and the grandson of Jane Seligman, related through marriage to the Seligmans and to the Guggenheims, took it under his wing, if you will, to find out some way to save the building. So he and Bernard Sandler, who was a New York attorney, and Mayor Weinberg from Long Branch, they worked and formed the Long Branch Historical Museum Association. Edgar Dinkelspiel found a clause in the original deed to the land by Lewis Brown that if the building ever ceased being used for religious purposes, the property right to the land would revert back to Lewis Brown and his heirs. With that in mind, Edgar Dinkelspiel and the members of the organization contacted the descendants of Lewis Brown, explained to them what they wanted to do, and every single one of them signed over their rights to the land and donated it to the Long Branch Historical Museum. And then once that was accomplished, the diocese in Trenton then sold the building to the organization for $1. And the museum was born. Quite a feat. Unfortunately, one of the biggest issues with the museum building itself is when it was built, let me see where all right, yeah, let's go to the next picture, Gary. You can see some of the decay that occurred to the building. And you look in the lower portion, you can see that we're, putting on some new cedar shake shingles. Next slide. And this is where the major problems with the building were. It was a dirt floor. The red brick exterior to the building was just built directly on the ground. There was no foundation. And the building was crumbling. When Edgar Dinkelspiel died in 1997, the following year, his wife became the president. That's when she asked me as a deal historian to join the board, and I did. The Monmouth County Historical Museum Association was asked to come in because they were like, well, maybe we can make this a county project. And the representatives that came came inside the building, looked at it, and literally as quickly as possible got outside the building because they were fearful that the entire structure was going to collapse. So what we had to do was we had to pour in a cement foundation. We had to put in those gray metal things, which are L brackets. So the steel and the cement is holding up the entire building. This one section, you can see the cinder block, we had to put that in behind the red brick just to shore up the foundation. Next slide. And that one, I guess somehow that picture is upside down, but let's go to the next slide. All right. So the first slide that you just saw was us having to put in the framework, the floor joists, the vapor barrier and all of that. And this is one of the things that we just completed. Actually, this was all going on during COVID, since we only had a handful of laborers in there. But you can see that, you know, we now have a floor, and I know, you know, Peggy and several other members of your museum have attended events there. You know, this is the first time that the floor is being shown publicly, and it's, you know, quite a feat. Next slide. If you, I was thinking about the movie The Great Escape. If you look at that little cart underneath the altar, was just a dirt floor. So part of what we had to do was get under there, dig out all the dirt, and then put in a cement foundation under the altar. So that's been completed as well. All right, next slide, Carrie. This is one of the projects that we did, the beautiful cross windows, which are all original to the 1892, 1893 edition of the tower. They were completely restored and reinstalled. Next slide, Gary. And you can see where they go in the tower. They're in the midsection of the tower, and they really are beautiful, especially when you see them from the inside. So if you can go to the next slide, Gary. And when the sun shines through them, it really brings out the beautiful components to the glass itself. And while we're looking at this slide, that's one of the things we're in the process right now of applying to the Monmouth County Historic Commission for their restoration grant, that we have to repair all of the sheetrock on the inside. Now we finally finished the exterior restoration and the structural restoration, so now we're ready to turn our attentions to the inside of the building. And this is just typical of what all the lath and the plaster looks like. So we need to remove the plaster and then replace it. The next slide, Gary. And how do we do that? Well, we have a lot of people involved. In the top picture, you can see we have U.S. Congressman Frank Pallone and Darren Davis, owner of Celtic Concepts, the landscape, and then also Guires on Brighton Avenue. The blue shirt is Randy Gabriellen, our Monmouth County historian, and also on the Monmouth County Historic Commission. And then, of course, our esteemed mayor of Long Branch, John Pallone. And then down in the lower right-hand picture, you'll see with the microphone, New Jersey Senator Vin Gopal, who has been a great champion for our efforts, and most recently, last year, got us a $250,000 state appropriation for the restoration. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and that money got frozen. So we're still trying to figure out if and when that funding will ever get unfrozen. Next slide, Karen. And here's just another one with some of our board members. You'll see in the red sweater vest is Todd Katz. And again, our assemblyman, mayor, and senator. And if I can just give a shout out to Todd Katz and his brother Gary. The Katz family has donated over the past 22 years that I've been involved with this project, every drop of paint that's been used on the building, just one of their charitable donations. So, you know, thank you to the Katz family, and certainly to their late father who started the donations, Larry Katz. Next slide. Probably the best speech I've ever heard in a historic presentation was given by the man in the center here, Dr. Paul Kurzman, who was the great-grandson of Isidore Straus, who died in the sinking of the Titanic. And this picture was actually in 2012 on the 100th anniversary of the Titanic. And he came down to our annual cocktail party and was our keynote speaker. And you want to say what a great speaker he was. But Adam Schneider, the former mayor of Long Branch, and I had a great time enjoying his presentation. Next slide, Gary. And then again, you know, we have Senator Tom Kane Jr. and Sean Keane, no relation. But it was an idea that I had because in 1931, for the 50th celebration or remembrance of President Garfield's passing, Hamilton Fish Kane was a New Jersey senator, and he spoke over at the Church of the Presidents at the Garfield Memorial Service. So I said, wouldn't that be cool for the 125th remembrance of Garfield's passing if we get Hamilton Fish Kane's grandson in here? And somehow we were able to twist his arm, and he came down Elberon and spoke, and it was a great evening. Next slide. And, you know, unfortunately, here is a picture of President Grant's house, which was torn down in 1963. And if you look in the background, you can see Stella Maris, which was George W. Child's house. And actually, I think 2 years ago, Dr. Rich Fernicola and I gave a similar presentation as you're hearing tonight to the Long Branch Historical Society. And somebody asked the question, well, you know, how come you didn't say President Grant's cottage? I said, well, it was 1963, and I was still wearing diapers then, so I apologize for not being involved with that demolition. Next slide. This is the interior views of Stella Maris, George Child's house, and the beautiful, beautiful, it's unbelievably beautiful, and this picture doesn't even do it justice, but the whole living room was floor to ceiling tiger oak with the fireplace, mantelpiece and all, and the columns and the staircase. And, you know, we were fortunate enough to ask, and we asked Ike Shahabar, who purchased the property a couple of years ago, if you're going to tear down the building, can we take all this historic woodwork and recreate it? And he said, sure. At first, we wanted to move the entire original building, which was about 60 foot by 60 foot, and it would have cost about $150,000. And we tried to raise money, but there was no money coming in, so we had to go to Plan B. So since we couldn't move the building, we had to take from the building that which was still historic. And this is a picture of what we were able to take. Next photo. Another section of the historic woodwork there that we were able to salvage. Next shot, Gary. And I bring this up because here are two of the life-saving stations at Takanassee Lake, which were, you know, pending doom if they weren't moved. And on the left is the 1878 building, which was modeled after the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. And the other one on the right is the 1903 building. Both of those were moved to a private residence on Ocean Avenue. Next slide. And here's the 1878 station under restoration. This is probably, even though the photo you're about to see is, you know, a finished product, to me, just seeing over the years all the different colors and how many times this building was painted over the 140 years is amazing. But with enough money, anything can get restored. Next photo. And here is the finished product. And it's on a private home right there on Ocean Avenue in Elberon. Next slide. Next slide, Gary. There we go. And that's the other building, the living quarters. The gentleman who restored both of these buildings, to me, it's amazing the job that he did. But he's also the person who assisted us with the removal of all the historic woodwork from Stella Maris and placing it into the Chelsea Avenue Lyceum Catholic School. And as you know, Anthony Drexel's daughter became the first American-born saint and St. Catherine Drexel. So what the homeowner did was moved it into the school and made it into the St. Catherine Drexel conference room, which the Church of the Presidents will be able to use for meetings and events. Next slide. All right, so we're getting close to the end, and I just want to ask the question, does anybody know where this building is? I'll give you a hint. It's on the Long Branch and Deal Turnpike and Woolley Avenue. Remember, I gave you a hint earlier where Woolley Avenue is. Anyone? Anyone? Yes, that's Norwood and Park Avenue. Next slide. And that's what the building looks like. Well, actually, that's not what the building looks like today. It's what the building looked like about a week ago. But there was a guy over at his house today taking all the vinyl siding off. And that was, so now you can see the green painted cedar shake shingles underneath that. But this house was built, some say 1863. It was definitely built by 1867 because its picture on the previous slide was taken from a book in 1867. Was built for Edwin Adams. But the house is historic. Many of the President Grant house and the George Childs house, those were also built in the 1867, 1868 era. And this is a historic structure. Edwin Adams was a prominent stage actor. This house is for sale. I don't know if the taking down of the siding is getting ready to renovate it or to tear it down. But that's one of the things that we as historic-minded people have to keep in mind of, let's save as much as we can. Next slide. So one of the things I said earlier was, Mary Todd Lincoln is credited as being as the first lady to come to Long Branch. But clearly, if you see here, in August of 1856, a full 5 years before Mary Todd got here, Mrs. Franklin Pierce, vacationed in Long Branch at the Howland Hotel. And next slide. As did Mrs. Andrew Johnson. Now, in 1866, so 5 years after Mary Todd, and Mrs. Johnson and entourage were at the Continental Hotel. What I find amazing with both the Franklin Pierce and the Andrew Johnson is the president is expected later in the week. The president's expected next week, but then there's nothing. There's no follow-up articles. There's no, oh, sorry, the president couldn't make it, or, oh, the president finally arrived. We have no information. And those are, one of the things that we've been trying to work on. So is to, explore more, because there's still more history that needs to be researched and uncovered. And, maybe we'll be able to find out that, yes, Franklin Pierce and Andrew Johnson were here. Just like many people say that Abraham Lincoln was here, and that's still debatable. There's a famous photograph from 1861, but clearly that's not Abraham Lincoln. That's Dr. William Augustus Newell, who escorted Mary Todd Lincoln to Tackanassie Lake for an exhibition of the life-saving station. Okay, brace yourself, folks, for the next photograph. Next, Gary. Oh, did you change it? Oh, there you go. All right. So we did have another president come to Elberon this past summer, and then I think it was 2 years ago. So he's been here twice. Just like U.S. Grant was personal friends with George Childs and Anthony Drexel and some of the others that were here. President Trump is friends with some of the residents in Elberon and Deal, and he came for a fundraiser this past summer. But I know that, people have a lot of feelings about the election coming up. So let's quickly move to the next photo, Gary. So I couldn't think of a more polar opposite photograph of the president in Elberon than, my wife Kate and I at Haight-Ashbury, which happened actually to be on August 9th, 1995, the day that Jerry Garcia died. And we just spent part of our honeymoon in San Francisco after we left Hawaii. Just a side bit, that t-shirt, I still have it, and I can't believe it still fits. But anyway, I cannot let this be the last image that you see in my formal presentation. So Gary, can we save the audience and go to the next and final photograph? And this is a woman by the name of Vivian Carr. And she was, you know, just a Elberon, Long Branch, West End woman. Every year she came to the Church of the President a couple of times. She gave us a nice sizable donation, but who knew? And when Vivian passed a couple of years ago, we got a notice saying that she had left the Church of the President in her will. And I was, you know, flattered and happy and, you know, all of that, but, you know, didn't think that we'd be getting any large sums of money. I mean, she just seemed to be a very down-to-earth person. I guess nobody knew exactly how wealthy she was, but she left the museum, you know, over $100,000, which I think is amazing. And we were able to use that money to, you know, make those repairs and the putting into the subfloor to the building and fixing the tower and, you know, getting ready to make the other repairs. We're now getting ready to do the repairs to the rest of the stained glass windows. So that's the end of my formal presentation. Hopefully I didn't go too long. I do want to just say that if anyone wants to get involved or make a donation to the Church of the President, just go to churchofthepresidents.org, and everything else is on the website. So I'm going to throw it back to Lois, and then she's going to field some question and answers if anybody has any. So thank you very much,
Jim. If we were in person, I think everybody would be giving you a very, very loud applause. I could probably ask everyone to unmute, but that might foul everything up. So Paul can do that at the very end. Jim, I'm going to take advantage of my position and ask you the first question. Many, many years ago, in the late 60s, I was a teacher at the Elberon School, and I used to walk my class down to the Church of the Presidents, and a gentleman, an architect and an artist, Maurice Podell, used to take us into the what is now the museum, the church, and show us around. And there used to be art shows in the summer. Are there any plans for that happening again?
Yes, there are. And that's, and I, as a child, growing up 100 yards away from the museum, also went to the art shows as a kid every year at the end of August, beginning of September. It was, you know, just an amazing time. But yes, we're getting closer and closer. And I predict that within the next year that we'll be able to start having some events back on the grounds of the museum, like the art shows, as well as other events at the museum.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And I do have to say that Long Branch is very fortunate to have the museum and to have such passionate people as yourself involved in it, because this is a labor of love as well as a need to restore history. And Long Branch is one of the most historic towns up and down the coast. So just thank you for your energy and your interest. I'd like to go to the chat room right now. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. Let's see. When asked, I could not confirm the presence of President Hayes in Long Branch. Has the presence of Hayes been documented? Has the presence of Hayes been, this is from
Randy Gabrielle, yes.
Yeah.
And Randy Gabrielle is our Monmouth County historian. So how you doing, Randy? And to the best of my knowledge, yes, President which one was it again? The Hayes?
Hayes, yes.
Yes, President Hayes' presence in Long Branch has been verified. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that, off camera, but it'll take too long to get into now. But yeah, he was here.
Okay. And we have another question from Marion to everyone. What denomination was the church?
Originally, it was Protestant Episcopal, which was common back in the day, and it was deconsecrated in 1953. So it's a deconsecrated chapel.
And can you explain what that means for those participants who may not understand that?
Well, for a religion to host religious services in a building, it has to be consecrated. It has to be blessed by whatever religious sect or denomination is. And that building was consecrated in 1879 and then used as a summer chapel until 1953, when the Protestant Episcopal Diocese in Trenton deconsecrated it, which meant that they would no longer authorize or sanction religious services in the building.
I see. And I know that the church has been referred to as the Summer White House. Who gave it that name?
Well, I don't know if the church itself was referred to as the Summer White House. It was, for the most part, President Grant's cottage on Ocean Avenue, just north of the Ocean Beach Club, was President Grant conducted official business there, and many of his cabinet members rented cottages connected with the Elberon Hotel. So during President Grant's term, that's where it got the title the Summer White House.
I'm looking at the chat room and I don't see any other questions, but I know you have a lot of questions floating around in your head that people have generally asked you. Could you address some of those, Jim?
Sure. Well, there was a long period of time. I think it was New Jersey Congressman Thomas Scully in the 19-teens was lobbying to have what's today Monmouth University, then Shadow Lawn, home of Woodrow Wilson, summer home of Woodrow Wilson for 1916, made the regular summer White House. So there was a movement. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere, and there is not an official summer White House for the president, like there is a summer or the presidential yacht or Air Force One or whatever. But the other question is, as far as and I never used the person's name, but the person who assassinated James Garfield, there's always been the rumor that he came to Elberon and was actually peeking in the window of the Church of the Presidents and was going to assassinate Garfield there in Elberon. We have not been able to verify that. Certainly the windows would have been low enough where he could have peered in. He says that he didn't shoot him because Mrs. Garfield looked so weak and pale that he didn't have the heart to kill him in front of his wife. We do know that 2 weeks before Garfield was assassinated, he did attend services at the chapel, but Mrs. Garfield stayed home at the Franklin cottage, so she wasn't physically with him. So that leads me to believe maybe it wasn't the Church of the Presidents that the assassin stalked, but probably a church in Washington, D.C.
We do have a comment from Randy Gabriellen, and he states that he has not found the term Summer White House used until around 1890, and the term typically applies to a working place for the president. A grant for one stayed in Washington until his work was completed and used Long Branch as a respite rather than a working place. Thank you, Randy. And for those of you who are members or who attend our meetings, Randy has been an attendee and a speaker, and he is a wealth of knowledge. I'm glad you're here, Randy. Thank you. Jim, is there anything else before we close that you would like to tell the group about the association?
Yeah, other than, you know, we are an association that accepts donations. We accept people getting involved. You know, we've had great kids from Long Grant schools come and you know, help with, you know, raking the leaves in the property or, you know, whatever it is. So we just encourage, but certainly in this time, with everything that's happening, if everybody can see my shirt, I would just encourage everybody in the next week or so to make sure you all go out and vote. Because your voice does matter. It matters nationally and it matters locally.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to turn the microphone back to Paul Edelson. And once again, Jim, you've been terrific. I think the whole association is wonderful. And join with us in other meetings that we have. Paul,
Thank you so much, Lois.
Okay. Thank you, Lois. And thank you for actually, we wanted to come back with something in the fall. We've been closed for so long, and the idea of having a Zoom meeting with a speaker was fantastic, and Lois was able to get Jim to come forward, and I think that's really fantastic that she did. All right, Jim, that was a fantastic presentation, and I think for everybody that attended, we've got somebody who knows a tremendous amount of history. He's able to present that, which is fantastic. And I will say that Jim and his friend Rick Fornicola have done a lot for the Ocean Township Museum. If you see that there's a grindstone out in front of our museum, that also belongs to them. The Wilson desk, it's in most of our displays inside, that also belongs to Jim, and it's fantastic. And I would also like to say that he talked about the book put out by the county clerk on the people in history. Jim Foley is also in that book, and there's a copy in the museum, and you're certainly welcome to come in and take a look at that. All right. So once again, thank you, Jim. And I have just a couple of announcements. I want to thank everybody for coming to the Zoom presentation. And it looks like there were a lot of people here, and we appreciate it. There are two events. I'd like to tell you that on Saturday and Sunday, November 14th and 15th, from 12 to 4 p.m., there'll be the doll clothes sale in the front of the museum. It's a great time to look ahead for your holiday shopping. The ladies who do the quilts, a few of them have been making crafts, usually at home, and they come together to put them together, and that's been tremendous for us, and they've done a great job. And also, stay tuned for details about the annual holiday weekend. It's on Saturday, December 5th, and Sunday the 6th. That's always there, but with the changes and everything, with the pandemic, we're trying to come up with the way so we could really appeal to everybody to come. You will get information from us. At this time, I usually, in every meeting, tell everybody to go to the back of the room for the baked goods. Unfortunately, the baked goods are in my kitchen, but maybe one day we'll be able to get together in person and we'll still have baked goods for everybody and drinks and everything. So once again, thank you for coming. And I hope you enjoyed the broadcast, and please stay safe.